Hello, coming to you from the symphonic city of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Conductor Bryce. Tied with the popular recurring Out of the Dust Geek list on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a bi-weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we played that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 61. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Orleans out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off Flat Top. On the reaction segment, I discuss Aaliyah's announcement of the Castles of Tuscany. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review On Mars. On the Obscure Bryce Game segment, I review Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrel. And we wrap up the episode by counting down my top 10 games that stood the test of time in 2019. I had a chance to bring Orleans out of the dust recently. Orleans is the acclaimed 2014 bag-building game from publisher Tasty Minstrel and designer Rainer Stockhausen. I last played it 3 years, 6 months, and 17 days ago, shortly after the Invasion expansion came out with a friend who wanted to play the cooperative module. It was a really cool experience that made me increase the priority desire of the game on my wishlist. But for the last 3 years, I've been holding out for a deluxe edition without any luck. Finally, I gave in when a seller offered the base game, both expansions, and the Geek Up Bit set for $80 at the BGG Con virtual flea market. That Geek Up Bit set is really nice and worthy of sacrificing needing to hold out for the deluxe edition. I tried one of those solo modules, which was alright, but I've had a couple of particularly great games with my wife, who I've narrowly beaten both times, but who has really taken to the bag-building mechanism. We used the Orders module most recently, which I was a big fan of, and I'm really looking forward to exploring some more of the modules in the near future. I don't foresee this getting dusty again anytime soon. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. BGG user Arcology brought Flat Top out of the dust. Flat Top is a 1977 Avalon Hill World War II War in the Pacific themed war game. Arcology last played it about 25 years ago. They write, I bought this in the mid-1990s and Avalon Hill was going down the tubes, and random Avalon Hill games like this would mysteriously appear in my local hobby stores. I'd never actually seen a copy of it on sale at a retailer before, or maybe I never noticed it. But in any case, there it was. Excited by recent readings about the Pacific and worried I would never see a shrink-wrapped copy again, I seized the moment and my credit card and bought it. A year or so later, I punched it, and 2 friends of mine got together to play a refereed game, which is as awesome as gamers frequently say it is. When I got this out of storage recently, I found our notes in the box. Most of them were hexes and other handwritten gibberish, but one read, Cited 3 CAs, 4 BBs, 4 CAs, 8 DDs. Just kidding. It was a false sighting which captured the tension of the game and parried perfectly, if cheekily. This jewel of a game has been in various boxes since. Not exactly dusty, but a ripped box corner attests to some level of neglect. I'm sorry, Flat Top Box. I've lugged it around in various moves, including a cross-country one. The fond memories of that Saturday and the unique topic led me to keep it. And as I've cleared away other games in the attic and whatnot, getting rid of that mental and physical clutter allowed me to focus on games that I've cherished. This is, even after 25 years or so, still one of those. It's only in the past few years that I had both the space and time to actually revisit this. I'm in the preliminary rules reading and counter clipping phase, yes, all 1,300 counters, as the first steps of this renewed journey begin. Thanks for the contribution, Arcology. This is a non-traditional Out of the Dust description, since it sounds like they haven't actually played the game again yet, but it's too cool of a story not to share, and I always like hearing about forgotten games like this one. The story of acquisition reminds me of when I first acquired my copy of Avalon Hill's Dinosaurs: The Lost World around the same time frame. Reaction segment time. Aaliyah recently made an exciting announcement for a new Stefan Feld game called The Castles of Tuscany. In typical Aaliyah fashion, they accompanied this announcement with absolutely no follow-up information whatsoever, which has caused rampant speculation among board gamers. Due to the similarity of title, most people seem to believe this is going to be a sequel to Feld's modern classic Castles of Burgundy, but I'm not convinced. I can't help but be reminded a couple of years ago when Forum Trajanum was announced that people immediately thought it was going to be a sequel to Trajan, just because the word Trajan was part of the title. And so with that in mind, I don't see any compelling reason to believe Castles of Tuscany will have anything to do with Castles of Burgundy. I think Feld just likes the French Renaissance theme and is returning to it with a new game and a clever marketing move by naming it something similar to capitalize upon his legendary game. Nothing wrong with that, and it probably even makes sense if the games are similarly themed. But I, for one, am cautioning gamers to not expect a sequel here because there's no evidence of that, and there's even the past history of Trajan Form Trajanum to suggest otherwise. But let's talk about Alea's weird penchant for secrecy, which really doesn't seem to make sense in the modern board gaming landscape. It's only slightly less annoying than Rio Grande's stealth marketing philosophy where entire games themselves suddenly spring into existence without any knowledge ahead of time. In Alea's case, their secrecy has already backfired once. There were a lot of people excited for the anniversary edition of Castles of Burgundy last year, but were ultimately disappointed by the final product. There were questions leading up almost to its release about whether this was a deluxe edition or not, if there were gameplay changes or not, and how much expansion content would ultimately be included. This last element is what really made some people mad. Eventually, Alea announced that all previous expansions would be included, but when they released a component list just before the release date, the numbers didn't add up. And indeed, the first expansion new player boards and the German Championship boards were not included in the anniversary edition. This was a big disappointment to a lot of people, but if Alea had not had a shroud of secrecy around the game for no good reason, this disappointment could have been averted if people had just known about it beforehand. For myself, I think the positives of the new edition outweigh any negatives, and it was worth it for me to invest in the new edition anyway, but the missing player boards were a disappointment, and so I worry that Alea is going to shoot itself in the foot needlessly again with Castles of Tuscany. I think so many people are going to illogically expect Castles of Burgundy 2.0 that when they get something completely different, they will feel cheated and disappointed, regardless of the doubtlessly high quality of a completely new Feld game. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about On Mars, the new game freshly fulfilled via Kickstarter from heavy game master Vital Lacerda and publisher Eagle Gryphon Games. Lacerda and Eagle Gryphon have a proven track record of success, so it was an easy decision to kickstart this game when the campaign launched last year. There aren't many Kickstarter games that I'll drop $100 on, consider the investment completely safe and worth it. But On Mars checked both of those boxes. Eagle Gryphon is second to none in production values these days, and they've delivered another beautiful one in On Mars. But is it all eye candy, or does Vital have another hit on his hands? Well, here's how it works. The game revolves around an innovative turn order and action selection system that divides the 10 standard actions into orbit actions and colony actions. Players can only choose one of the 5 orbit or 5 colony actions if their turn order markers on the appropriate side of the board. Naturally, as is a hallmark of Lacerda games, these actions are tied indelibly together and feed off of each other. On the orbit side of the board, players can acquire tech tiles, develop them on their player board, acquire blueprint cards, raw resources, and travel immediately to the colony side of the board. On the colony side, players can use the raw resources to build resource-generating buildings, upgrade those buildings with the blueprint cards, recruit scientists, and speculate on contract cards, build rockets, and move their robots and rovers around on the planet's surface, clearing building spots, picking up useful crystals and tokens in the process. Most of these actions will provide players with various ways of accumulating victory points, both in-game and at endgame. Depending on how much the players have collectively developed the Martian colony, a shuttle will travel from orbit to colony, or vice versa at the end of every round, every other round, or every 3 rounds. Players can hitch a ride on the shuttle to get to the other side of the board, and timing these rides is pivotal to carry out actions at the most strategic and opportune times. 3 mission cards encourage players to focus on a unique combination of actions for extra rewards. When these mission card actions have been collectively taken a certain number of times, the end of the game triggers. There's been some debate amongst heavy board gamers about the weight of On Mars compared to Vital's other games. For my part, I think this is his heaviest one yet. Each of the 10 actions involves an intricate process to complete, and there are a lot of little details to each one. With several plays under my belt now, I am still discovering little elements that I've glossed over or gotten wrong, and have not yet played a completely rules-perfect game as a result. Yet, despite the complexity of the game in general, the theme comes through as strongly as any of Lacerda's other games, which is a unique talent that he has managed to figure out that many other heavy game designers have not. And so, while I would not rank On Mars as highly as most other Lacerda games, The successful marriage of mechanics and theme does make it a fun game. It's very satisfying and engaging to contribute to the colony's development while manipulating little things here and there to put yourself ahead of the other players in the fight for solid points. But ranking Lacerda games is a lot like ranking Steffenfeld games. They're all good, and the separation between each one is minimal. So while I still like Lisboa best, with Gallerus and Escape Plan a close second and third respectively, On Mars settles in as a close fourth. I'd only put a point or two between all four of them on a 10-point scale. Obscure Bryce game segment time. This week on the segment, I'm going to tell you about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrel, a board game of English magic. The game is published by Osprey Games and designed by Marco Maggi and Francesco Nepatello, designers best known for War of the Ring. So they've got a track record for successfully adapting established properties. As the title implies, the game is based on the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrel television series, a series of which my wife is a fan, which is what initially put the game on my radar. I've never actually seen the show myself, but I'm happy to put out feelers for games she might like based on IP she enjoys. The game came out just last year, didn't make any sort of a splash, and has quickly faded into obscurity, accumulating less than 10 logged plays a month currently. But should it have faded so quickly? Here's how it works. In this competitive game, players are magicians trying to increase their power enough to defeat the gentleman with the thistledown hair. Every so often, players will compare their magicianship to the gentleman's. If none of the players are able to match the gentleman's ever-increasing magicianship before too many rounds have elapsed, everyone loses. Otherwise, the first player to match the gentleman's magicianship will win the game. Players will attempt to accomplish this by completing feats of magic, taking on pupils, and by collecting books of magic. At the beginning of each round, a card draw will determine how much the gentleman's magicianship increases and which magical elements are able to be used this round. On a player's turn, they choose from a personal menu of actions, covering it with a marker and unable to select the same one, until they spend a turn clearing their actions. Actions might move a player to another location on the map, acquire a book of magic, bring additional magical elements into play for the round, or activate a special ability. Then a player is allowed 2 moves on the map and 2 visits at the locations they reach. Visits either advance a player's prestige through the use of introduction cards, which determine turn order and unlock access to pupils and additional special abilities, or attend events, which grant players more cards. These cards are multi-use cards and also feature a magical element on them, which can be discarded to play an element token of an element currently in play on a feat of magic card. So that collecting all of the element tokens listed on a feat of magic card performs the feat and increases a player's magicianship. This is the main way to gradually try to accumulate enough magicianship to match the gentleman. What little press the game has received since its release has been a mix of critical reception, the main negative commentary being that the game feels repetitious after a while. But I found myself quite enjoying my play, and I found the game as a whole a satisfying and challenging experience. I like games that pit players against the game in addition to their opponents. It's a nice change of pace from singularly trying to outplay my fellow opponents. And as my love for Australia indicates, I'm also okay with non-cooperative games in which everyone can lose. The gentleman with the thistledown hair is a very tough opponent indeed. My friend Warren, who taught me the game, had not yet seen anyone manage to defeat him, so I felt genuinely fulfilled when I managed to surpass his magicianship on the last turn of the game after carefully timing elements to be able to do so. And I always appreciate games in which timing is important, which also makes turn order important in this one, a manipulative element that is always engaging to me. The game has real tension as the rounds progress, which makes each decision and action take on importance. I was pleasantly surprised by Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrel and have added it to my wish list. This episode of the podcast, I'm going to continue my review of 2019 with a countdown of my top 10 games that stood the test of time. These are games that I learned in 2018 that saw multiple plays in 2019, have held up since learning them, and in many cases have even grown in my estimation. Most of these were also games released in 2018, but there are a few older new-to-me titles mixed in as well.